Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Embodied podcast. I'm super excited this week to dive into the second episode in the Embodied Self Love series, which is about self-awareness. And self-awareness is the first of the big 5 in my Embodied Self Love framework. This is also episode number 339 overall of the podcast throughout all its iterations. So if you want to grab the show notes, you can find those at untameyourself.com/339. Alrighty. I have my notes geared up here so I make sure I can rein myself in from my proclivity for tangents. And I love this. I love starting out. The reason it starts out with self-awareness, something I've been saying for many years, is that self-acceptance has to come before self-improvement, right? We can't improve a thing if we don't first accept it. Because if we're coming from a place of resistance, shame, blame, denial, any of these things, making ourselves wrong, we can't truly improve something. We can't really change something until we accept it. And before we can accept a thing, we have to be aware of what it even is. And we have to know what we're working with. So self-acceptance is step number 1. Self-awareness is step number 2. Self-awareness is step number 1. Self-knowledge is step number 2. We'll get into knowledge next week. As well, I was on Instagram this week and I caught, it was just the last little sentence of a post that Elizabeth Gilbert made. And it said, "May we all be brave enough to allow love to transform us forever." And she was specifically talking about love with another. And I also want to invite us to allow self-love to transform us forever. Because there's something that is so epically beautiful and satisfying when you love yourself. There's this inherent resourcefulness. There's this fulfillment. There's this innate, constant satisfaction and contentment that's always within reach. It's like a baseline level where even when we go into our depths, even when we get plunged into grief or shame or something happens in our lives, it just doesn't have to be so hard if there is this, again, baseline, this level of self-love. So self-awareness, to dive right in now, is how we start to relate to ourselves and observe how we are showing up in life. It's a consistent, mindful practice of observing ourselves and being honest with ourselves. And this is really key. Being as honest with ourselves as possible. It's not just how we think and what our intentions are, but what's the impact that we're having on others and that we're having on ourselves. And also, how are things going through our experience, behaviors, and choices? This is what self-awareness helps us to recognize. It's calling attention to yourself with purpose. And to be real, it's not always easy or pleasant. Sometimes you won't like what you see, but when you commit to observing yourself for the sake of knowing, trusting, accepting, and respecting yourself, you could do it from a place of relative objectivity rather than scrutiny. And I always teach my clients and students that awareness comes before acceptance. Acceptance has to precede improvement, just like I said in the beginning. And all these things require curiosity, but also gentleness. We observe so we could better see ourselves. We don't observe so we could judge, pick ourselves apart, or anything like that. We observe so we can then do the rest of the steps in the framework. Again, knowledge, acceptance, trust, and respect, and have that real, genuine, cultivated self-love. This is also how we check ourselves. We take a thorough look. We also look at, again, all the levels. Everything in my wild soul world, in the embodied living world, we are always looking at things from the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual perspectives. We are integrating those consciousnesses and those bodies. We all have all of those. So self-awareness answers these questions. It's 2 questions. Who am I being? How am I showing up? And again, with as much honesty as possible. And I say as much honesty as possible because self-deception is real. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So because self-awareness requires observation and inquiry, I've broken it down for this episode in the 3 things that you want to start observing, or you want to deepen or be more consistent with your observation of if you've already been engaged in the work of self-awareness. And some of you, I would guess most of you, are already engaged in this. I'm just going to put language to it and give it context so you could be more clear and you could be more specific. So the first thing is thoughts. And questions to ask when you're observing your thoughts are, is this mine? Why do I think this? Or why do I think this way? You notice as well if these, especially the repetitive types of thoughts or thought patterns or ways of thinking, are they in your own voice or someone else's? Do they come from, where do they come from? Is it your family of origin, your community, your school, your group, friends, culture? By observing our thoughts, this is how we get to dismantle our socialization and our conditioning, and then later on, take ownership of, maybe even reclaim or discover what is actually ours, what is aligned for us, what is in our values, what is in our integrity. And we're going to talk about values and integrity next week when we get into self-knowledge. Then we look at our feelings. And so if you haven't yet, make sure you download my embodiment Bible. You can get it at wildsoulmovement.com/embodiment. In the embodiment Bible, I talk about how, we've all heard this saying, feeling all the feels. And if you're listening, not watching, I put that in air quotes. This is a really vague catch-all for engaging with our feelings. And in some ways, it's a real cop-out. In the Wild Soul Movement world, I teach the value of specificity. So let's break down what feeling all the feels actually means. Feeling helps you to connect to 3 things via your body. And again, I'm always going to be coming from, my microphone fell. I'm always going to be coming from an embodied perspective. So the first thing is sensations. And sensations are things like hot, cold, pulsating, vibrating, tingling. These are sensations, literally. We have these feelings in our body, these sensations, and we observe them. And when you observe these things over time, you could become aware of what they're telling you. What is your body communicating with you when you get goosebumps? Or when your hands tingle, or when your feet feel numb? There's all these different ways to observe, and also observe the patterns, the consistency. Oh, when I'm in this kind of situation, this happens. Or when this person texts me, I get an immediate stomach ache. These are good things to pay attention to. Then there's states of being. Things like good, bad, calm, agitated, anxious, nervous, tired, energized, hungry, alive, open. These are states of being. And then there's actual emotions. Okay? And there's this cool feelings wheel. We'll find it and we'll link up to it in the show notes. But emotions, there's really only 7 main emotions. Everything else is an iteration or stems from these 7 main emotions: anger, fear, disgust, happiness, sadness, surprise, and contempt. So these 3 things make up all the feels. When you engage with feeling all the feels, rather than writing it off as one vague experience, you can learn to speak what I call your embodied language, which is your body's unique language of the senses, because your body is communicating with you all the time. And I also, when it comes to noticing and observing and bringing self-awareness to how you feel, one of the reasons why this is valuable, especially in the emotional realm, is so that you could develop emotional literacy, emotional intelligence, and emotional maturity. And I want to hone in on emotional maturity. I wrote a post about this on Instagram. At the time I'm recording this, it was just earlier this week. I'm going to read it to you. On self-awareness. Emotional maturity requires learning how to respond to people, sharing their feelings and lived experiences by listening and respecting that what they're saying is true for them, no matter how it makes us feel. Emotional immaturity can only respond with defense, debate, agreement, avoidance, or dismissal because we feel ashamed, uncomfortable, or confronted. Notice your responses. Now, I want to say something else that I shared here in the post. One of the biggest aspects of self-awareness is being able to observe ourselves with as much accuracy as possible, but 100% accuracy is not a thing because we've all got filtering systems that distort our perceptions. This is why I love to use this lens of emotional maturity and looking at the emotions. Sometimes what we can't see accurately or observe, we can feel with more acuteness. Sometimes, right? It's not foolproof because, we all have different things, traumas, triggers, wounds. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a little bit. We see this a lot in dynamics online, in relationships, in our own relationships with people. We have to be able to see when someone's experiences or feelings are pushing our buttons so that we can separate what's getting activated in us and what the situation calls for if we care about that person or want to stay in relationship with them, deepen or grow, or just at a bare minimum, want to treat people with respect and dignity because they're people and everyone deserves that. And again, this is hard because a lot of us did not grow up with models for this. So it takes work to get to that place of emotional maturity. So there's also responses and reactions, which piggybacks off of this emotional maturity. And there's a difference between the two, right? The difference between a response and a reaction is time. If we want to make it in the simplest terms, it's time, right? You can think of it this way. Responses are mature. They come from our healed places. They reflect our growth, our integration and evolution, and it includes our access to the heart. When we're responding, we are pausing, reflecting, and we're able to access our maturity, our emotional intelligence as well. We're able to name how we're feeling, separate it from what's going on with the other person, what that might be bringing up in us, but we can still be present, right? Emotional maturity responses are just more vast. They're deeper. They include a lot of this work that we do on ourselves. Reactions, though, are immature. They come from our unhealed places. They reflect our wounds and our triggers. Reactions come from the ego. Reactions are not like the evolved part of an ego, right? Egos can evolve. Reactions are going to be coming from, that part of the ego that is fearful, that's worried, that's wounded, that's scared. So this is something when I say notice your responses, I should also add to that, notice, are you responding or are you reacting? I had an experience a couple weeks ago where I was triggered. I was flooded. Flooded is a term that is used to describe trauma responses. I went into a total trauma response. And I want to distinguish this here because this is something we need to be aware of when something's a trauma response. And I would classify this as a reaction, right? Because we literally have no control over it. When we are flooded, the brain, the blood is going directly to our amygdala, which is that fear center, that fight, flight, freeze part of us. It's coming away from the prefrontal cortex, which is where we have access to logic and rationale and critical thinking and stuff like that, which, emotional maturity, emotional intelligence do include access to the prefrontal cortex. So I had an experience a couple weeks ago where something hit me in a wound that I haven't touched in years. I've been doing so much healing around this thing, but it was just like that next layer of the onion, right? Like that deepest part, the next deepest part that needed to be healed. And I had a reaction I haven't had a reaction anything like this in like a decade, y'all. It was intense. And then I had some cleanup to do. I had some repair. I had some apologizing to do, but then just some real acknowledging. We'll talk about this more when we get to self-acceptance in 2 weeks. I just had to accept that, that was a part of me. That wound is still in there. That is still like ready to be activated and triggerable. It takes a lot to do it. Like the thing that happened was, again, something rare that rarely ever happens, which is why it was able to poke me that deep, that hard, that intensely in that wound and have that trauma response. Because I've healed a lot of that stuff. I'm very regulated around these things now. But damn, that stuff's in there. And so as we observe ourselves, as we become aware, we also need to be aware of, what are the places that if they get poked, I might not have access to a response. It might be a reaction. There's also something really important to consider, and this is why I brought this up when working on self-awareness, and that is avoiding self-deception, which means learning how to notice when you're doing that, when you're deceiving yourself, right? Ways that we deceive ourselves are through projections. We make it about other people. So, and I'll get much more into self-deception in the Embodied Self Love mini course. I'm not going to super dig into this with you today because it requires a lot more teasing out. But a surefire way as you practice self-awareness to know or to at least be clued in that you might be deceiving yourself is when you're blaming other people or feeling like something is unfair, right? And that's not to say sometimes other people aren't to blame or sometimes things aren't unfair, but those are the things that you want to like look at. Those are kind of trigger words that you want to really investigate if they're coming up. If you're feeling like this is unfair, this shouldn't be happening to me, I don't deserve this, that person shouldn't have done ... If you're judging someone, if you're making someone wrong, if you're in what a teacher of mine called the need to be right, if you're in your self-righteousness, you might be right. You also might need to look at this and expand your perspective, right? Or suspend your concepts for a moment so you could really observe, okay, all those things might be true. It could be unfair. That person might have done something messed up, but also, what's my role in this? What do I need to know about myself in this? And that's not to take over responsibility for stuff that's not yours to take responsibility for, but it's also not to abdicate yourself of responsibility when, you have played a role in the thing. And I'll share another personal example because I told you I would do that through these series. In that experience that came up with that big trigger that hit me in a big wound, one of the reasons why I got to that point is because this was in an experience with a loved one in my life. Over the course of the last few months, this is a person who'd had a lot of stress and a lot of pressure and a lot of things going on in their life. And so I had been holding back from sharing some things with this person because their plate was so full. So I was like kind of waiting for the time when it would be better to say something because I didn't want to add more stress, add more burden to their experience. And so I was already kind of like stuffing down some stuff. And so at the point at which this like last thing happened that really triggered me, it was a complete straw that broke the camel's back situation. And that's something I had to look at, right? That was my observation. I had to go, oh, look what I was doing. I've been holding things in literally for like 2 months. And so I was ready to pop. Had I been sharing things in real life, it wouldn't have gotten to that point. It wouldn't have needed to be that like breaking point. I wouldn't have had to snap. And when we get to self-trust, we'll talk about it happened the way it happened. I needed that. That person needed that. We had to have that experience together, changed our relationship, and in a lot of ways, for the better. Now I can see in retrospect. So this is the other thing about self-awareness, and I'll end the episode on this. It's an ongoing practice. All of these things are practices. Self-love is a practice. It's ongoing. It's something you're going to be cultivating over the course of your entire life. You'll be up and down with it. Sometimes you'll have energy and bandwidth for it. Sometimes you won't. And so you do need to let all of these things be living, breathing, evolving, ever-changing practices, and accept that. There's not an arrival. I mean, you might meet benchmarks, right? When we talk about observing your responses, it's an amazing thing when you can respond to something differently than you used to. You know you've grown. You know you've made progress, right? Like, this used to really set me off. Now it barely even phases me. So we have to observe ourselves over time and also in different contexts and different situations and look at what were the factors. Like the story I just shared with you, the factor was I had things that I needed to share. I had needs that I wasn't addressing, that I wasn't bringing to this person because I didn't want to stress them out. So I was prioritizing their experience, deprioritizing mine. It was like bordering on self-abandonment, but not quite. I didn't fully go there. But it's these response times. Can you bounce back? Can you observe yourself? Can you become aware before something has to go really south or before you cause harm to another or cause harm to yourself? So I just want to remind you, all these things will be evolving. There'll be ongoing practices. A lot of people don't want to hear that. A lot of people want like the magic bullet, the quick fix solution. They want to get there. They want to be done, but you're never freaking done. This is our purpose, right? This is what we come here to do. We come here to grow and heal and be fully embodied. And when I say fully embodied, I mean fully embody our souls, the highest, most magnificent versions of ourselves. So that's step one, self-awareness. So I also want to let you know that you are now able to sign up if you want to do the mini course. If you're feeling this and if you're like, I want to know how to do self-love, I want to be able to practice this, I want to dig in a little bit deeper, I created a 3-part embodied self-love mini course. And I call it a mini course because it's 3 sessions where we'll cover the framework. Self-awareness, self-knowledge, self-acceptance will be week 1, will be the first session. And then self-trust and self-respect will be the second session. And then the third session will be all about boundaries because it all comes together. It all integrates in boundaries. And so I'm doing 3 sessions, but I'm spreading it out over 6 weeks so we could do Q&As. We can have integration weeks in between. I'll give you a whole week to sit with the content. Then we'll have a Q&A. Then there'll be a whole nother week to reflect before we go into the next topic. I love teaching that way. I like giving people time to be with the thing, to kind of see how it's showing up. And then we could dig in. And you're able to join if you go to wildsoulmovement.com/self-love. You can sign up for the mini course. It's just $99. You can either join by just getting the mini course and you get access to all, the calls, the materials, the recordings. Or you can become a member of the Embodied Movement Studio for 2 months. The course is included there because quarterly mini courses is something that's included in the membership for the Embodied Movement Studio. And if you join the Embodied Movement Studio way, you also get access to that whole community in Mighty Networks. We already have like tens. It's not hundreds yet. We have tens. I don't know, like probably 40, 50 classes over the course of the last month and a half because I stream, might be more than that, maybe like 60 because I stream like 10 classes a week. Wild Soul Movements, Sacred Body Work, Erotic Body Movement, Healing Meditations, Wild Soul Sweat. And a lot of the mantras for the Wild Soul Movement practices are super supportive for the embodied self-love work. So if you want a little extra, it's the same price. You can join the studio and you can have access to the course through your membership there, or you can just buy it as a standalone thing at wildsoulmovement.com/self-love. So as always, I would love to hear from you. I will be, sharing quotes and things on my Instagram profile from this episode. If you liked this, share it with your friends, share it on social media, pop something about it in your Instagram stories. Let me know what you thought. Shoot me a DM on Instagram at Elizabeth DiAlto. I really want this series to be a bit more interactive. I want to know how it's landing for you. If you're applying these things, what's happening, what's shifting in your life, because you can really start implementing the things that I'm talking about in this framework right away and already start to see things shift and change and evolve. So I'm really excited for you. And I'm a big geek with this stuff. I love it. So I want to hear from you. Let me know how it's going. And again, if you want quotes and timestamps and stuff for the episodes so you can refer back to things, go grab the show notes at untameyourself.com/3 339. All right, y'all. I will see you next week.